be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I have a very special guest, TEDx speaker, author, and corporate humorist, Andrew Tarvin. Andrew, thank you for joining me today.
Charles, thank you for having me. What a wonderful, you've got a good voice for podcasts. I don't know that I do, but you've got a good intro voice. I'm hyped that I'm here based on your intro.
Well, thank you. Well, Drew, I'm curious, do you know how much a polar bear weighs? Enough to break the ice. It's nice to meet you.
Oh man, I feel like I need my own bear pun. Hold on. Okay, just a big pause to let me think of one. Pause, bear pause. No, okay. All right, no, it's nice to meet you as well.
So tell me, what is it like navigating a career in humor as an R2-D2?
Lots of beeps, lots of beeping and functions. No, I mean, it's interesting because I never expected a career in humor. In many ways, I still don't have a career in humor. I just use humor as a tool for all the other stuff that I want to get and the other aspects of my career. So it's been a very interesting, but very, very fun journey.
So tell me a little bit, what is a corporate humorist?
Mm-hmm. It is essentially the closest term that I could come up with when I was still at Procter & Gamble. So short kind of career journeys, degree in computer science and engineering, started working in IT at Procter & Gamble, first in Cincinnati, Ohio, then later in New York. And while I was there, I started to incorporate humor into my work. Both as a way to just make my work a little bit more fun by making meetings a little bit more exciting. I started to, in reference to R2-D2, I started to do personality assessments for my team members and not just, the common ones like your strength finders, but also which Star Wars character are you? So I know I'm R2-D2. So fun, a little bit of humor that way. I started writing a little bit of humor at P&G. They had this 5E model of leadership, which were like these 5 values that strong leaders create. And I thought, I've had some really good leaders. I've also had some bad ones. So I think we need a 5F model of unleadership, or the values that people are things people are doing that demotivate the people around them. And so it was written with a little bit of a sense of humor. And so essentially, I think, a corporate humorist to me is someone that does one or both of those things, either uses humor to get better results in their work, or uses the workplace kind of as a way to create a little bit of humor and levity to shine a light on an idea or to create a connection with someone, etc. So it's taking the fun of comedy and or humor and applying it in a workplace setting, really.
Why do you believe we need more humor?
Well, I love this as a question because should we have fun? I don't know. And part of it is, it actually, it's a simple question, but it reminds me of a very simple, very important, very dumb question. that I ask audiences and groups when they're saying like, okay, why should we listen to you? Or why should we, incorporate humor in our training, et cetera. And so the very simple, very important, dumb question, Charles, that I'd love for you to answer is just, would you rather do something fun or not fun?
Oh, fun all day for sure.
Right? Exactly. Like 99.9% of the people that we talk with say fun. They're like, as long as it doesn't cost too much money or end up with me going to jail, like, no, I'm in for the fun. And so it stands to reason that if you were to make your, emails a little bit more fun, would people be more likely to respond to them? Or if you were to make your meetings a little bit more fun, would you be more likely to have people attend? Or if you're to make your own work or your own projects, your own whatever you're focusing on just a little bit more fun, would you be more engaged in it? And that's what the research shows us, that the answer is yes. And so the reason we need more humor is one, life is too short not to enjoy some of the time that we're spending wherever it happens to be, work or otherwise. And two, it's actually going to help us do whatever it is that we're trying to do better.
Have you ever had to deal with like a branch from was it Trolls, the first one, where he's gray and he doesn't have any fun and there's no joy in whatsoever? Have you ever had to deal with someone like that?
I've dealt with trolls for sure directly, but those are more internet trolls. And there's plenty of those on the TEDx YouTube comments and stuff, which are very funny. In fact, one of them said, this guy's forehead is so big, it has its own sense of humor. So it's like, all right, yeah. That is very comedic. I'm talking about the skill of humor in that TEDx talk, so very appropriate for them to be comedic in it. But certainly I've never met any human that doesn't have a sense of humor. I have met plenty of people who have a very specific or maybe slightly obscure sense of humor. So what they laugh at is very different. And then I've also met a lot of people who have for whatever reason, unfortunately, have felt that they need to suppress their sense of humor or any modicum of joy when it comes to being in the workplace. And I think part of that is a little bit of a generational thing, which makes sense if you're coming out of the Industrial Revolution and then into kind of how we're all working in factories, et cetera, before, then humor was less important. But also work-life balance was more defined for you. Because, if you are working in a factory, you can't bring your work home with you. You're not going to carry the machine home with you and bring it there. And I'm going to do a couple of extra plating exercises when I'm home. No, like it stays at work, you clock out, you clock in. Whereas now in a knowledge economy, one, we are constantly with work. We constantly have devices. We constantly can be, on our laptops or whatever. And then two, your emotions impact the way that you can be productive, right? How you feel is a big impact on if you are creative or if you are focused, et cetera. And so managing the holistic experience of our human lives becomes even more important today.
Yeah, I would agree with the amount that we work more because of the fact that we bring it home. That humor, breaking that up is super important in my opinion too. Before I get too much more into your story and where you came from with your humor, I want to know, what is the difference between humor and comedy? Because I think a lot of people get confused and though I'm not funny, so I can't be humorous.
It's a great question and great distinction to make. And I kind of think about it. Do you remember that old elementary school logic where it's like all lions are cats, but not all cats are lions? Right. It's that kind of same distinction that pretty much all comedy is maybe a subset of humor, but not all humor is comedy. And so comedy is very clearly kind of meant to make people laugh, right? It's meant to be quote unquote funny. Whereas humor is defined as a comic, absurd, or incongruous quality causing amusement, which is just a dictionary definition way to say it's less about things having to be funny and more about things being a little bit more fun. So, it might not be, you might use a little bit of humor in your work and not make people laugh, but maybe they smile, or maybe they lean in a little bit more, or maybe they smirk just a little bit. And that alone can be tremendously valuable. That's one of the distinctions between, say, humor in the real world or what you see in a comedy club versus humor in kind of, say, the workplace, is that the expectation or the bar for what is quote unquote humorous or enjoyable is so much lower at work because of how terrible most meetings and experiences are. Just add something a tiny little bit different already goes a long way in making it more enjoyable.
So what it sounds like to me is it's more of making light of the hard parts of work to make it more enjoyable over the long-term time that you're there. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely one application of it. Now, there's
Okay.
certainly other applications where you can say, no, I'm very going to intentionally learn setup and punchline to make people laugh, or I'm going to very intentionally start with a very funny story so that people are listening, and that's going to lead into the thesis of my presentation a day, et cetera. But yeah, as an overall strategy, it's much more about kind of a little bit of lightness, a little bit of levity, a little bit of saying that the average person will work 90,000 hours in their lifetime, which is a long time. So it's like, well, you might as well enjoy some of those 90,000 hours.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now that we're talking about the humor, tell me a little bit about your first trip into the world of humor.
My first trip into the world of humor was, well, probably growing up. I mean, I was never a funny person. In fact, I was almost the opposite of having a good sense of humor at times, because my mom would do every now and then, she would try to make a joke and I would take it far too seriously. Like I remember one day my arm was hurting, and I went to my mom. I was like, Mom, my arm is hurting. And she was like, oh, okay, well, can you pass me those scissors over there? And I was like, okay, yeah, but what do you want to do with them? She's like, well, if your arm's hurting, I'm going to cut it off. And I like bawled tears. My mom felt she traumatized me. She felt so bad. And clearly what was just a joke. I was this traumatized kid that was taking it far too seriously, etc. So growing up, I was not that naturally funny person, but I found a great amount of joy in reading things like, Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side and Peanuts and all of that. And so I always appreciated humor. My first foray into creating humor kind of intentionally wasn't until college. So I went to The Ohio State University, got a degree in computer science and engineering. And my best friend there wanted to start an improv comedy group and basically forced me to join. I didn't watch Whose Line Is It Anyway and be like, I could totally do what Wayne Brady is doing right now. I can totally do that same. Not at all. It was more of like I was forced to. All of my friends were going to do it. So I was like, I guess so. And I did more of I was good at the project management side of it. I was good at the okay, if we're going to do this, we're going to practice 3 times a week. And we're going to have a business meeting every single Monday so that we can grow the group, and we're going to make flyers, and we're going to film all of our shows so that we can go back and watch it as if it was game day. Because we had no idea. We weren't reading. We didn't know any books. And this was before there was a bunch of improv classes that you could take in Columbus. There wasn't as much on the internet, etc. So it was very much kind of self-taught. But in that process of being really, really terrible for a long time, one, I started to get better. So realizing that it was something that I could learn. And then 2, oh man, the world that it opened up to me in terms of being, one, changing my perspective on some of the things that were happening to me, because I was always very much a planner. And so to be a little bit more adept at being able to kind of be agile in different situations was helpful. It gave me a ton more confidence, not just in terms of presenting or public speaking, but just in who I was as a person. And like I mentioned before, I started to get better results with, my job as an RA, with some of my classwork in school, later when I was interning, and then later working at P&G. Like it was this whole kind of like, oh man, this skill that I thought was just humor has applications in my entire life.
Yeah, I love the approach too, because I personally believe that greatness is a skill, and because it's a skill, we can learn it, we can get better at it. And much like comedy and humor, it's a skill. And at first it wasn't very easy. It came a little bit rough. So talk to me about your process of learning that skill and how you developed it throughout your time at OSU.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was certainly an evolution, and it took me a while to understand the phrasing of it. But one of the big things that I've learned from improvisation that I think is true is just with about any other skill, and I realize that there's parallels between computer science and improv and humor in many ways, is that failure is just data. Right? Failure is not commentary on your worth as a person or what you're going to be able to do in the future. It's just to say the one thing you just tried didn't work. Right. And that's true in computer science. We're very fortunate that we run a program through a compiler, and then we run through and it spits out errors and says, well, if it's C++, then it's just kind of like something went terribly wrong. And it's like, oh, I missed a semicolon, versus newer languages are like, this is exactly what's wrong in this spot. You need to go back and change it. And so that's just data, right? It's just to say, okay, these are the tweaks that I need to make. Same thing in stand-up. This is why stand-up comedians do shows over and over and over again. They're always workshopping and trying out material. And it's not to say, not, hey, you're not a funny person, or that's not a funny idea, but it needs some tweaks, or you need to change the language, or you need to there's too much in the setup, etc. There's a fantastic documentary called Comedian by Jerry Seinfeld, and it takes place basically the year after he retired a bunch of material. After he finished Seinfeld, the show, he was like, okay, I'm not going to do any of the material that I've done before. Any of the material that made me famous, I'm going to start from scratch, from 0 minutes, where I'm going to start with writing and then do 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And it follows this journey of Seinfeld, who was already one of the most successful comedians at his time at that time. And he's just like bombing at first. He's doing terrible. At one point, someone who's not from the US asks him if it's like his first time trying to do stand-up comedy. Like, it's a very real look at the process that goes into it. And that whole thing is just like computer science. It's just failure as data. Hey, the way that I shared that story didn't work. And so for me, there was a lot of data in the sense of a lot of failing, a lot of messing up. And we read some books that we could around humor. So I think there's certainly value in learning from others that have done what you have done, because you can shortcut the process a little bit. So reading the Comedy Bible by Judy Carter was super helpful in terms of, here's what a setup and punchline is. Here's what we mean by a set list. We tried to read Truth in Comedy, which is a very popular kind of book within the improv world. Had no idea what it was saying. We didn't know what a herald was. We didn't understand long form. We did watch Whose Line Is It Anyway a lot and say, okay, these are the games that we're playing. That can we play as well? This is what they're doing. But the biggest thing that we did was we practiced. It was the repetition. It was the practice and repetition and trying it out and being like, okay, that didn't work. Why? Okay, that worked. Why? And let's just kind of keep going and build that up. And it certainly takes time, but this is the benefit of learning a skill like humor, is that it was a lot of fun to do. At least the failing was fun.
Yeah. Do you still feel like you have moments where you try to throw things out there and you have to tweak it?
Oh, absolutely. I was just in Kansas City for an event. So I was leading a 3-hour workshop on kind of how to unlock your natural sense of humor at work and how that applies to these IT professionals, and was crushing. And it did with the whole 3 hours. They loved it, got incredible feedback from people. And I'm working on a new story. And so whenever I work on a new story, I know I need the reps, I know I need the process and stuff like that. And so there happened to be an open mic nearby the hotel that I was staying at. And I was like, hey, it's been a couple of years, especially with the pandemic and all that. It's been a while since I've done an open mic. I'm going to go and check it out, get a rep of the story, see what's working, see what's not. And I absolutely ate it. Like, I had just come off of 3 hours in front of IT people crushing it. And then here was a room full of 20, mostly comedians, but 20 people. And it was a function of, one, the audience was very different than what I normally speak to. It was very young and a bunch of like, not necessarily unemployed, but not career people, because they're all comedians and stuff. And two, it was a really relatively new story. But yeah, it definitely did many things in that 5-minute set that did not work. But the good news, like I said, failure is just data. I learned a lot from it. And I do that type of thing because the other thing about, I think, whether it's pursuit of humor or pursuit of greatness or whatever it is you want to create safe spaces where you can fail, where you can have that data. And so an open mic, the stakes are incredibly low. It's much better for me to practice a brand new story at an open mic with these 20 people who, now there's a group of 20 people in Kansas City that think that I'm not funny at all. And if they were to see my TEDx talk later, they'd be like, what? That's not the same person, is it? But that's much better than for it to be a paying client that I'm working with, or, someone with the Red Cross that I'm working with one-on-one, or whatever, some of these clients that I might be doing these projects with. And so that having that safe space and getting those repetitions in a safe way, I think is really valuable for any skill.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So what would you do? What would you give as far as advice for somebody who wants to start to implement humor, but they don't know where to start? And maybe they're too afraid to get in front of people because that's terrifying for most of the world. Yeah. So where would you recommend they start?
Well, I think it's important to recognize, one, maybe get past any limiting beliefs that might exist there. And so if humor is a skill, which means it can be learned, then it means the question isn't are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you, or what kind of funny do you want to be? And that's some of the newer work that we're doing, is recognizing that the type of humor that you use, Charles, might be very different than the type of humor that I use, and the way that you present or express. And so we've identified what we consider kind of the 7 primary humor personas of how people express their humor. And so part of it starts with identifying, what do you naturally do? So for example, of the 7, the one that we most naturally think of in terms of a humorist or a comedian is what we call the entertainer. They are the person who is the life of the party. They're the ones where like they're just a fantastic storyteller, and they're the ones at the beginning of the meetings that everyone's just kind of gathering around because they're really funny. Or it's a relative that like at Thanksgiving you're always sit next to them because you know they're going to regale you with all this entertaining content, etc. And for them, it's very natural to say, oh yeah, I use humor all the time. What's interesting about entertainers is that they don't necessarily know why people are laughing. They just know that they're funny. They just know, hey, when I tell a story, people laugh. And so for entertainers, it can actually be helpful for them to learn about the skill of humor so that they can be more intentional about it. Because sometimes entertainers are like, most of the time I'm good, but sometimes I have an off day. And if I have an off day, like, what do I do? Or if I say something, no one reacts to it, like, then I start to get in my own head. How do I handle that? Right. So there's actual value for entertainers learning about that. But that's just one persona, right? There's other ones that are incredibly valuable. For example, one of the most common ones as a way to start is a curator. And a curator is simply someone who not necessarily is funny themselves, but maybe they're really good at identifying funny and sharing it with other people who might enjoy that funny. So for example, if you're that person who's constantly sending in your friends group chat, like the perfect GIF for the reaction to things, or you're the one that's like sending me, like I have a friend of mine who's just constantly sending me like Instagram reels that he knows that I'm going to like or enjoy. He's not being funny himself in that moment, but he's curating a nice humor experience for myself. And that can be a tremendous way to incorporate humor in your work, right? Using images in your presentations that's interesting and funny, et cetera. You don't then have to do the punchline. You don't have to deliver anything kind of that differently, but you're still bringing a little bit of levity to the forefront. So I think a big part of it, and I'm happy to talk about the other personas, but the biggest part is kind of recognizing, okay, there are these different styles. I don't have to be that stand-up comedian as a way to incorporate humor into what I do.
I love that. So yeah, I do want to dig into the other styles because I think that's interesting. And then after we go through that, I do have another question about maybe identifying which style works for you. Is there a test? Like, have you created a way to, all right, I'm a little bit of an entertainer, I'm a little bit of a curator, like make it like a personality test for humor?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So that's what we've done. So we have a completely free assessment. It's like 2 minutes long. And the idea is to help you understand, okay, what is your primary persona? So if people want to take that, then go to humor.me/great. So we'll have a page set up specifically for those of you listening to this right now. So just go to humor.me/great. We'll have the assessment there and some other resources available for you. But essentially it is to identify one of these 7. And what's interesting about these 7 is because they're skills, you can learn the other ones, right? If you are naturally a curator, it doesn't mean that you can't become an entertainer. In fact, you can, and being a curator can help you get closer to the entertainer. It's just by saying, okay, this is where I can start. And so any of these personas that I talk about, what we encourage is start with your primary one and then build that skill set of the other ones as you go along, because each one has their own value. Each one has their own different way that they can show up in the world. And each one has their own benefits in terms of, if I'm trying to achieve blank, okay, then this persona is going to get you a little bit closer to that. So certainly there is an assessment. The other personas, so one of the first ones that we start with is what we call the enthusiast. And the enthusiast is simply someone who is very good at appreciating humor, someone who laughs and smiles a lot, someone who can find the humor in everyday situations where it doesn't necessarily have to be a perfectly structured setup and punchline joke to make them laugh, but they're like, oh, and that kind of, those flowers are interesting today. That makes me laugh or smile. And there's tremendous benefit to being an enthusiast. I mean, Charles, you're a great enthusiast when it comes to us having this conversation. For me to be able to see, hey, head is nodding along, smiling, etc. When someone is speaking and you do that, it creates a much like, oh, I feel more confident when I'm saying, I feel a little bit better about this happening. So especially in a virtual environment, An easy way to include a little bit more levity into the workplace is turn your video camera on in a virtual meeting and smile and nod along a little bit to what a person is saying, right? So just do what Charles is doing right now. But that also shows up in a lot of other ways in terms of supporting other people. It shows up in terms of yourself. What's really interesting about comedy. So there's a cliche in comedy that says comedy equals tragedy plus time. I don't know if you've heard that before. Comedy equals tragedy plus time. And the idea is that if something tragic happens and enough time has elapsed, then we can start to find the humor in it, right? So it's like why, you can kind of make jokes about Titanic now because there's been a movie about it and it's been a year, but no, that was a tragedy for a long time. You probably could not make jokes about that. But some people find the humor in it now. And of course, that works on a personal level as well. Like I joke about me in high school, where I tell that story about me and my arm getting cut off and bawling tears, because enough time has elapsed. If that was last year, it might still be a little too fresh of my embarrassment. But what's interesting is there's a corollary to that, and what I've found is that if something happens to you and you can find the comedy in it pretty quickly, then it doesn't feel as tragic. Then it feels like more time has elapsed. And that's what I mean kind of when I say that humor helped me to change my perspective, is that pretty quickly now I'm able to adjust to a situation. Okay, what is that humor? Okay, and even in the face of this adversity or this challenge, I'm not going to let it rob me of my sense of humor, of me being able to find joy. And so what an enthusiast is able to do is find humor even kind of in the hardship, just to find, maybe it's not funny, maybe it's not quote unquote stand-up comedy funny, but it's like, man, that's interesting, or man, how ironic that that's the thing that happened. It's similar to the Kurt Vonnegut quote that says laughter and tears are both responses to frustration. I myself prefer to laugh because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards.
I like that. So we've got 3. You said there's 7. What are the other 4?
So the other 4, just at a quick level, is, so we've got an enthusiast. So basically they appreciate things. A curator takes the things that they appreciate and share out, like we've talked about. We have the entertainer, which is really good at delivering humor. We also have what we call an inventor. They're good at the writing down a setup and punchline. They understand things like comedic structure. They intrinsically, or they have learned things like what a comic triple is. So a comic triple is a list of 3 things where the third thing is unexpected, the third thing is funny. So for example, if I say, I usually listen to podcasts at 2x speed, because not only is it faster, more efficient, but also more people sound like me, right? So it's a list of 3 things. The first 2 things are normal on that list. The third thing is slightly unexpected. And a comic triple, you'll start to notice it's in advertisements, it's in a lot of different places, but inventor says, okay, this is one known structure that I can do. Or they know, associations are good. So I have a 5x5 list that I can create to create an association, et cetera. So they're the ones that are good at sitting down and writing it out. And then the entertainer is good at delivering it. We also then have what we call the engineer. This is kind of the primary persona that I have. And this is someone who really uses humor as a primary focus to solve a problem. So less about hey, let's just have fun, or I'm going to do a stand-up comedy special so that people just laugh and we have a good time, but more of, okay, I'm going to use humor and this at the beginning of my presentation so that people are listening and they have I have some credibility. Or okay, I'm going to use humor in this moment to diffuse a tense situation. Or I'm going to watch a comedy special right now just because I'm feeling stressed out and I need to recharge a little bit. So there's a little bit more intentionality about it. Then we have the advocate. The advocate is someone who is about creating the space for humor for other people. They're the ones that are like, hey, I know that so-and-so is a great entertainer. So I'm going to ask them to MC this 2-hour meeting that we're doing coming up on Friday, because they're going to be really good at that. Or so-and-so is a fantastic enthusiast. And so I'm going to just make sure that I share some funny ideas with them, because I just know that they love to laugh and their laugh is contagious. And so I just want to hear them laugh. So I'm putting in them basically as conscious of the other ones. And then the 7th one is the skeptic. And the skeptic is someone who is a little bit uncertain about either the benefits of humor or humor in a certain setting. And I'll be honest, Charles, at first, I kind of thought of this as a negative one. I thought of this as one that was just like, okay, these 6 are the primary ones. And then if you think I'm an idiot, then you must be a skeptic and you're terrible and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I realized that's not the case. I realized that there's tremendous value in a little bit of healthy skepticism when it comes to I think all things in life, but also humor in particular.
I think that's very interesting. And I got a couple questions out of that. The first is, as a leader, if you're trying to implement humor into your environment, how valuable is it to know what each one of your employees is on this humor scale to help set them up for success and make it even more fun than it otherwise would be?
Well, I think that's what's tremendously valuable about this concept is it's just like any kind of personality assessment that you do. And that's why I joke that I did even with Star Wars one. But for me to know the mapping and know that I'm R2D2 versus someone being a Luke Skywalker versus the boss being a Darth Vader or whatever it happens to be, a Palpatine, perhaps being even worse. Like there's value in knowing what resonates with people, whether that is on a communication level. What is their communication preference? Do they prefer WhatsApp or a text message or a phone call or a virtual meeting or whatever? Do they prefer an email, etc.? Like knowing those things allows you to be more influential. As a leader, it allows you to be a better leader. It allows you to be a better mentor or supporter of other people. And humor is exactly the same way, right? If you know these certain strengths and put them into positions of strength. And one of the best questions that we ever got, there's an annual survey they did every single year at P&G. And one of the most important questions on that survey, it was pretty long, but one of the most important questions was, are you in a position to like best utilize your strengths in your role? And essentially what they always wanted to find out, like based on what you think your strengths are you leveraging them? And if not, we need to start to modify that role or we need to change it. And so I think it's the same thing with humor of like, are you able to leverage that humor persona in what it is that you're doing? And as a leader, if not, then okay, how do we modify that or find some ways to introduce it? And as an individual, if you're not doing that, okay, how do I maybe adopt some of the other personas to be able to get that additional benefit?
So the other question with this is, have you noticed a particular humor type being more prevalent?
It ranges a little bit based on organization type. So for example, we've seen with more sales groups, they do tend to have more entertainers and a few more enthusiasts. With IT folks, you tend to have more inventors. With older generations, you tend to have more skeptics. Older generations, and then also some with underrepresented populations, you tend to have some skeptics and that's part of what kind of cued me to say, no, like skeptics can actually be really valuable in the sense that there are times where someone makes a joke that you shouldn't laugh because laughter implies endorsement. And so if someone has just said something that is offensive or prejudiced and you're like, ha, 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 they're like, hey, everyone really loved that. I'm feeling pretty good. And the person who's marginalized by it now is like, great. Not only is the boss a jerk to me and being prejudiced, but everyone around them is enabling them. I don't have any allies here, et cetera. So there is, value in skepticism. And again, we can do a much deeper dive into that. The one persona that I think is one of the most common across all is curator. I think in the world of social media, we've all gotten kind of more into this mindset, which is a good mindset of like, oh, this thing made me laugh. I can share it with other people. And it's one of the easiest ones to start to do, which is great.
Yeah, no, I find myself doing the curating a lot just because I have my phone on me all the time. And if I'm scrolling through a TikTok and I see something like somebody getting smacked in the face with a tortilla, I know there's at least 3 people that'll laugh at that and enjoy that moment. So I send it on my way and I go, all right, somebody smiled just a minute ago. So
yeah. Well, and it's a great way to reconnect with people. I mean, one, you can certainly do with friends that you know. It's a way that we follow up with clients that have like, if we do a discovery call and things are really good, we often have some humor in the discovery call, and then we send out kind of the follow-up. And if a week later they haven't followed up yet, maybe they're busy or whatever, we'll send some type of humor. We'll send like, hey, based on what I just saw this thing that I thought would make you laugh because it's either something that we talked about in the conversation or it's something in their industry or whatever. And then, oh, by the way, if you have any questions about what we sent over, let me know. And we're providing value in part of our follow-up. We're providing at a minimum laughter, even if they never respond or even if they never answer the question that we asked. We're at least saying like, okay, we're going to give them a smile. And that's tremendously valuable. And we've gotten a lot of people that have been like, hey, sorry, it's been super busy, but I love that meme that you shared, or that video is really funny. Anyway, blank, like the yes or no, or that we're looking for. And then of course, with friends, it's great. One of my favorite kind of get to know you questions is, what do your friends send you? So I'm curious for you, Charles, what are the things that when your friends see, they're like, okay, Charles needs to see this. So for example, anything related to milkshakes, people will send to me. They'll be like, oh my God, have you heard of Black Tap? It's an amazing milkshake. Or did you see this TikTok video, someone drinking a milkshake in 2 seconds or whatever? Like anything related to that, and puns. Like people know that I love making puns. And so if there's a pun in the wild, they'll like snap a picture of it and be like, hey, I saw this and thought of you. So I'm curious, what do people think of you of and send? Anything come to mind?
I think a lot of times it's the humor where somebody does something stupid and just wrecks themselves. Like I find joy in that because part of me goes, you knew this was a bad decision, but you chose to do it anyway. And then you put it out there. So you obviously have some sense of humor because that hurt and I know it hurt, but you put it out there anyway. And so those things, I don't know, it just tickles me because I'm like sitting there watching this guy and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. Oh, that couldn't have felt good at all. So those are the ones I usually get, is those like slapstick style, like the tortilla one. That's hilarious. There's a prank group on TikTok that they go around and like throw each other in the pool or give each other wedgies. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, I couldn't imagine living in this house because I would just be on edge all the time. But it's hilarious.
It's hilarious. And so even those small things of like knowing that, it's like, oh, when someone sends you something like that, then you're like, okay, this person knows a little bit about who I am, right? Because they sent something that I'm going to enjoy. And each one of those is a little bit of capital, or it's a little bit of a reminder. It's a little bit of a like, hey, maybe we're not going to have a text conversation of how are you? And I'm feeling a little bit depressed right now and things are going tough or whatever, or I tried this project and it didn't work out and it's like, or whatever, but it's like, hey, I have this connection, right? So there's tremendous value in just being this curator. And that's just one persona out of all these 7 that you can adopt. And so like, that's where I said, like, start with whatever, no one persona is better than the other. They all have their pros and their cons, and you start with the natural one because they all provide tremendous value when used effectively and not kind of overused. The danger of a curator is someone who only ever sends memes or other things and never has the actual like, we don't actually have a relationship person with them. I just have like a social media feed. Like, no, you want to use that as an excuse to be like, oh yeah, we should catch up sometime, or should we have a conversation or whatever. Take it a little bit further, but there's a lot of value in each of these things.
Yeah. So how do you go about encouraging like leaders, managers, CEOs to embrace humor more in their workplace?
Well, it starts with first, with a lot of groups, it's sharing a lot of the research with them. It's, because I think there's this misconception that humor is either frivolous, or one of the fears that people say of like, okay, why don't you use humor more, is like, I want to be seen as professional. This weird kind of dichotomy that we have in the work where professional has to mean sterile, where professional has to mean boring. And like, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, some of our clients work on very serious things. Like we've done work with the UN, with the FBI, with the Red Cross. And it was a gentleman, the Red Cross, a guy named Pablo Suarez, who pointed it out to me. He was like, in the work that I do, when I'm teaching people how to be prepared for disasters that are probably going to come to their area, like a flood or a drought or whatever, if when I'm presenting, like people are checked out, that's bad. He's like, boredom has very serious consequences. And so I need humor because I know it's effective with people to make sure that I'm getting the message to them. And I think that's what people don't recognize, is that it's absolutely a function of how you do it. So only, like, we're talking about effective humor here, but effective humor is going to help you, whatever your primary goal is, it can help you to move the needle a little bit further, whether that is to, you're individually, you want to manage your mental health a little bit better or manage stress. Or if you're like, I want to be a little bit more productive, or as a team leader, I want to get the most out of my people, et cetera. Like humor can help in all of those components, all of those kind of goals. And so as a leader, part of it is first convincing them of that, like helping to kind of unlearn this thing of like, nope, because I mean, if you think about it, back in classroom, like, yeah, the class clowns were typically punished and they weren't like told how to like use that energy well. People were like, nope, everyone be quiet, shut up, no humor, etc. So we've got to unlearn that behavior. So I think that's step number one. Step number two is then how to use appropriate humor, because that's the other key, is that the humor that you use with your best friends that you've known for 30 years is very different than the humor that someone like Ali Wong is going to say on a stand-up comedy club stage, which is very different than what you would use in a boardroom when you're giving a presentation or an update. Doesn't mean that humor doesn't exist. I mean, even if you look at Warren Buffett's annual reports, there's humor throughout the annual reports. And no one would say like, well, Warren Buffett has no idea what he's doing. Like, no, he's kind of figured out some of these things. Like he also knows the value of humor, a good analogy, etc. So I think those are kind of some of the key steps is unlearning old behaviors, recognizing that it is a valuable skill, and then also starting to learn what's appropriate versus what's not.
Yeah. I find it interesting too that you mentioned like, the corporate or professional appearances, no laughter, no fun. And I've had coaches in my field, their fear is, well, I don't want them to have too much fun because they're going to get goofy. And then they lose their focus. So have you ever had that problem with the corporate world or the workspace that you work with where they're just having so much fun that they actually lose productivity?
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain, there's a conceptual danger of that. I don't know how much it actually happens. But absolutely, like that's part of the thing is you have to make sure that humor, when it comes to humor kind of in the workplace or humor in service of a goal, that it has to be clear what the goal is. It's not just humor for the sake of humor. It's not just, let's all just laugh just so that we laugh. It's right. Cause that's what people will sometimes point out, but like Michael Scott was always trying to use humor in The Office and it was terrible. And it's like, well, Michael Scott's real kind of goal behind that, even though he's a fictional character, was about validation, was about, he just wanted people to see him as funny or see him as that funny, friendly person or whatever, versus using humor in specific instances to achieve a specific goal. To say, oh, I'm going to use humor right now because I want to think a little bit more creatively and I'm in a little bit of a rut and I need to solve this problem, but I'm too in the weeds about things, so I need to take a step back. Oh, well, studies have shown that students who watch a comedy video before trying to solve a problem are nearly 4 times more likely to solve a problem than students who watch a math video or no video at all. So it's like, oh, okay, well, if I'm trying to solve a problem, maybe I'm going to watch a quick funny video just to get my brain and my synapses firing in a slightly different direction. So I add a little bit of creativity. Like that's very different than just like everyone be funny and try to be funny. So I think it has to really be serving a very specific goal. I think the other thing is I would much rather people that I'm working with lose a little bit of sight of the goal initially because they're having fun versus them not completing something because they are burned out, stressed out, worn out, depressed, over it, blasé, ambivalent, etc. Like fun is a pretty good, if fun is the thing that we end up doing in service of something else, there are worse things to have been distracted by.
Yeah, I don't see many people calling in sick because they're having too much fun.
Right.
So what is it about puns that you enjoy so much?
I think part of it is, and comedy to me in some ways is math with words. It is, and I think this is why I like it as an engineer. It's almost a puzzle to be solved. It's like, okay, how can I put these things together in an interesting way? And I think puns are just kind of the clearest distinction or format of that. It's one of those things. As people talked about it, it's like if you've come up with a pun, it's the greatest joke in the world. If it's someone else's puns and you might groan or whatever, but I just love the linguistic play with it. I like the discovery of it. Right. Sometimes that's what it feels like with humor is not that I came up with this joke, but I discovered that kind of this interesting parallel between these different concepts. And I think it's very accessible. Now I'm a recent father, so I have a 11-month-old at home.
Congratulations.
And thank you. And dad jokes I find are a really interesting and wonderful thing. And doing a little bit of research or seeing some stuff about it, it's like part of the value of dad jokes is it's a way for fathers or parents or anyone who uses dad jokes to share a form of humor that is maybe at times a little bit cheesy, but there is no target. There is no kind of someone that feels bad afterwards, except for if you just groan a lot at them or whatever. It's an endearing way to kind of share with the family. It's meant to create a positive light moment. And I think puns are maybe kind of an extension of that, of where it's like, hey, there's enough terribleness going in the world. Let's look at this fun little wordplay.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned dad jokes because those are definitely my go-to right now. I've got 2 little ones and a third one on the way, and there's definitely more joy in the dad jokes the older I get, for sure. Like you said, when you're younger, you're like, Dad, dude, that is an embarrassing thing. Why would you even say that? And now I find myself saying the exact same things. I'm like, I am my father. Good Lord.
Exactly. I have become my dad jokes. I become, and it's a fun, positive, connection. And I think that's what's interesting about humor. And even to this point, like I'm an engineer. I am against anything that is too touchy feely. Like, in any of my programs, we're never going to do anything remotely like a trust fall or that kind of stuff. And I'm certainly against even things that are like cheesy, I think are a little bit tough for me. But as I've gotten a little bit older, I'm also like, do you remember the joy of being silly a little bit? Like, and I think it's my daughter that's bringing that back out again, where it's like, I will do anything to make her laugh. It doesn't matter how silly or ridiculous it is, because she doesn't get my puns yet. She doesn't know how truly funny her father is. And she may never actually believe that that I'm not funny. But if I do a dance in a certain way, that cracks. So of course I'm more than, and as I do it, I find more joy into it. And humor, just like anything in life, is what you put into it is what you get out of it. If you go into something and you're like, this is stupid or this is weird, you're gonna keep that cynicism with you. It is so easy to be cynical in this world. To have a little bit of joy, to have a little bit of fun. It sometimes requires a little bit of intention, but man, it's a payoff. So good. Yeah.
Well, as we wind down here, I got one more question for you before I let you go. As a fellow milkshake enthusiast, I am really curious, what's your go-to milkshake?
I have a top 3.
All right, let's hear it.
So maybe the top of the top out of its decadence is a chocolate cake shake from Portillo's out of Chicago. So they're known for their chocolate cake. They blend it up and put it into a milkshake. So you get these small chunks of chocolate cake in your chocolate shake. It's amazing. For something a little bit quicker or less decadent, the hidden menu item of a Napoleon. Sorry, not Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte. No, a Neapolitan is what they call that. From In-N-Out. So where they will give you a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of strawberry, all in one milkshake. It's not on the menu, but it's one of their hidden menu items. So In-N-Out. And then a cookies and cream milkshake from my hometown of Cincinnati, Ohio, Grater's. Grater's is some of the best ice cream on the planet. And so cookies and cream milkshake there. Those are my top 3.
Yeah, I always go with the mocha chip from Grater's because I like the chocolate pieces. And then at the bottom, because it's all ground up, you get to spoon it out because it's too thick for the straw. So you got to finish up that way. So, Drew, man, this was an absolute pleasure. I smiled the whole time, so it was great for me. I hope my listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. Where can they connect with you and what you're doing and follow your journey and maybe get to see a little bit more behind the curtain of what you're working on? Certainly.
Well, as I mentioned before, if you go to humor.me/great, we've put together some resources there just for the you listening right now. Like I said, the assessment is available, so you can take that 2 minutes to find out what your kind of primary persona is. We have a bunch of other free resources on the website as well that you can check out. We have information about our workshops. So if you're a leader thinking, hey, we want to take our team through this, this is interesting, certainly happy to chat about that. If people are just interested in kind of connecting, you can find me on social media at Drew Tarvin. So DREWTAR, V as in Victor, IN. I'm pretty much all social media. You can connect with me there.
Awesome. Well, Drew, thank you so much for your time. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face, but remember, whenever we fall, always get up.
Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.